Welcome in live post game. The season is a wrap, but we got lots to talk about. CT with EJ in the post game 6 in the books. But before we get into the nitty gritty, I do want to say, a thank you to Knicks Nation. Streets is buzzing. Knicks Streets, all your support all season. It's been a fun season, and there's going to be a lot more content to come as we chop up the season conclusion. 2023 in the books, CT with EJ on the ones and twos, and I'm glad everyone out here rocking out. EJ, tough night for a New York Knicks fan.
Yeah. It's a really tough loss. It's a tough loss
Mm,
because, and before we even get into it, like I have to echo what CT said. We definitely want to shout out everyone who supported us this entire season. The highs, the lows, the Oklahoma City loss,
mm,
um, you know, the losing streak, then a winning streak, a tighter rotation, and then another winning streak. What we do is we sit and we chat, we discuss, and you guys come on and you support us, you share it with your friends. So we are really thankful for everything that you guys do. I'm gonna stall for a second 'cause I'm about to sneeze.
mm,
Allergy season, man. But this was a tough loss, and it was a tough loss in part because the Knicks this season have been the embodiment of a roller coaster, an emotional roller coaster. I made the joke, I think it was with John Schmelk, that this has been three different seasons. In this series, you can add
mm,
another four different series. The series before the actual series before the game started, then the game one loss, and then the game two win, and then the experiences in Miami, and then a glimmer of hope after game five, and then a crashing realization that the season is over today. And this game was a microcosm of how many different seasons we've had in this one season. There were highs at the start of the game with that
mm,
14-point lead. I know many of us were thinking that this could be a turning point, like what many of us thought as being just a pipe dream at the beginning of the season. Could the Knicks actually mount a rally in Miami and do it in a dominating fashion, and to go from the possibilities, the wild imaginations we could have at the start of this game, and and then to even have the Gabe Vincent flagrant foul, and then yet another glimmer of hope, and for it to all fade away. Um, that's this
mm.
Knicks. That's the 2022 2023 Knicks. It's a roller coaster of emotion. So yeah, we'll have a lot to chop up tonight.
Yeah, most def. And obviously about the game and a future outlook, and we got the draft lottery around the corner. See what happens there. But yeah, for tonight, what can you say? I mean, we need 1,000 words, and that's still not enough. But appreciate everyone in the chat. Yeah, all your emotions, all your thoughts. We've got some Heat fans here. Much respect. The Heat obviously wrapped it up in six. A learning lesson overall, EJ, for me, for the organization this season as a whole, top to bottom. Right up until the final buzzer tonight, Leon Rose will have learnt a lot about his coach, about the squad. We learnt a lot about Jalen Brunson, arguably the best acquisition, free agent signing in franchise history, and he was an absolute warrior. So yeah, I want to salute the hard work all the players have put in, the organization. There'll be evaluation, there'll be autopsies from us coming, but tonight's going to be about the game, so to speak, the series, the playoffs also. Um, yeah, the New York Knicks. What's most frustrating tonight, EJ, is that um, like you hit on with the flagrant towards the end, the New York Knicks did not give up, kept fighting, but ultimately, some of our young players and some of our veterans fell short tonight, and I felt like we left this game on the table. 92-96. If I had told you that not one team would have cracked 100, uh, it would have been, not too shocking because it was a dogfight, it was a battle, it was physical. But what are your overall thoughts on the game?
I think that a lot of us on this podcast and on this show tonight are going to be in lockstep with one another. There's the game, and then there's some of the takeaways that we're going to have from this particular series, as well as this particular season. Obviously, I would love to have had another game on Monday night, especially at Madison Square Garden. But if we're going to lose the series, I think there's something to be said about losing the series and Casilla Center in Miami, as opposed to losing it in Madison Square Garden. However, with that being said, many of you in the chat are saying exactly what I'm about to say right now. And if there's one thing we can pull from tonight's game, is that Jalen Brunson is perhaps, and I always try to leave a little bit of room for possibilities, perhaps the best free agent signing we've ever signed for this particular organization. He's a transformational player. He is not a good player. He's not a very good player. He's a great player. Um, as a matter of fact, we can have a conversation as to whether or not he was robbed in terms of a position in the All NBA roster that came out earlier this week. However, when we look at this particular game, the big takeaway is that Jalen Brunson may not jump the highest, he may not be the fastest, but he has the heart of a champion. He plays like one. Um, and if we were to look for the positive for tonight, Jalen Brunson almost scored 50% of the Knicks offense tonight. And that, to me, it's frustrating, but it's also indicative of the potential for 2023, 2024. If we can find some depth, if we can find some player development, if there can be a player acquisition. I know that we as Knicks fans, we love to live in the realm of player acquisition. We only needed one starter to score 8 more points.
Man, absolute heroic. He was,
Yeah.
yeah, heroic. If we win this ball game, it's obviously because of Jalen Brunson. Um, we did get some foul calls that were there, but we were getting more of a whistle. Um, but other guys not able to step up, like Seth says in the chat. Four other starters are giving you 5 of 32, and we'll talk about the turnovers. Knicks 12 turnovers to the Heat 7. That was a huge key for me. We needed to force the Heat into more turnovers, get more possessions. But having said that, 92-96, to have a chance to tie it with 15 to 20 seconds remaining in the game, but I'm certainly not going to blame Brunson. I think it's more indicative of his maybe trust later in the game. Josh Hart on the floor, EJ, late.
Yeah.
It was going to be a hot topic. It was going to be a debate. Were you shocked at all Quentin Grimes was not on the floor? Because I think if Quentin Grimes is that man in Josh Hart's spot, Jalen Brunson probably passes him the ball.
Um, I think I think that the final possessions, the final 3 or 4 possessions,
Mm.
were a culmination of quarters 2 through 4 issues.
Mm.
Um, Josh Hart being on the floor was the result of, in many ways, RJ Barrett having the kind of game that he had tonight. Josh Hart being on the floor was the result, in part, of Julius Randle having the kind of game that he had tonight. Um, Josh Hart had to be on the floor for defensive pressure,
Mm.
which left Coach Thibodeau in a weird and awkward position because he knew he needed more offense, and he was asking Jalen Brunson to really pull off a Herculean feat, and that's the nature of what happened tonight. Like, I don't blame Josh Hart. I don't blame Jalen Brunson. I blame the lack of offensive production from the majority of the rest of the roster tonight. I mean, again,
Yeah,
let's just say it. Jalen Brunson had nearly 50% of tonight's
yeah,
offense, and that's not
yeah.
hyperbole. That's a fact.
No, absolutely. Like how EJ and chat fam, how he wasn't an all-star this year is ridiculous. But um, and he kept chirping at the ref, foul every time, every time. He said every time. They finally started to call some whistles, but he was smacked in the face, bumped, bruised, made New York City proud, the New York Knicks fan base proud. He's our MVP, and it's fittingly saying this right now, as I said in the season preview, that Jalen Brunson would be our MVP this season, and he delivered, absolutely delivered. We look forward as a fan base because we have Jalen Brunson and we can build upon that. We've got other people around the league probably looking at this situation. He's getting accolades from ESPN. I mean, it was there for everyone to see. By golly, he was a Herculean effort, and yeah, Knicks fan base proud of what Jalen Brunson has accomplished, and almost get us to a game 7 in the second round with a great chance to make the Eastern Conference Finals. Um, you could chop up so many plays in this game, but I thought one small critique I would have had is, look, this was Jalen Brunson's game. I thought at some points of the game he deferred a little too much. Now, I don't care if he is going to draw the ire of the fan base saying he's a ball hog or he's a chucker or whatever. That even if he had missed the game and lost the game on his own shot, I would have been okay with that because he was the only player that had it going and in do or die stakes. Would you have had an issue if Jalen Brunson had just been less, had deferred less and tried to take over more?
Honestly, um, I was hoping that if he had put up 30 shots and 40 shots, I wouldn't have minded. Because there's a point where you start to
Mm,
realize the moment was getting too big, and I'm not gonna call out any players yet, but the moment was too
yep,
big for several players. Like you could tell that
yeah,
there was a level of anxiety on the court, especially as we got into the fourth quarter. And one of the things we've been saying a lot, one of the things I've been saying a lot, and like since March of this season, is that basketball is mental. Basketball is not just physical; it's a mental sport. It's an emotional sport. It's a spiritual sport. It's like, can you actually get into? Not to sound like Phil Jackson, because we know how as Knicks fans we feel about him, but can you get into the zen? Can you slow things down? Can your heart rate slow down as opposed to be going like 120, 130 miles per hour? And tonight, you saw several players panicking, like the ability to think clearly, especially as they faced double teams, especially as they were close to the sidelines, making just unforced errors. So, would I want Jalen Brunson with the ball in his hands more? Yes, because tonight he was perhaps one of the few, two, three, four players who showed up and who showed they had the courage to make big decisions and to make smart decisions. And that's what's frustrating is that on one end we had Jalen Brunson making very smart decisions, but a lot of foolhardy, a lot of foolish plays on the other end. So with regards to Brunson choosing to be more selfish, yeah, but I'll just throw this caveat and I'll toss the ball back to you. Part of the issue too is that because of Jalen Brunson's ability, sheer and innate ability to score and to just direct the offense, one of the issues that we have is our offensive creativity. It was really exposed tonight, or lack thereof, rather, the lack of offensive creativity. Um,
yep, preach.
that's again 8 more points from starters, but there seemed to be no ability to create 8 to 10 more points out of a starting unit. And that's the result of several players just not having the ability to have the offensive creativity in crunch time in high leverage situations.
Yep, facts. So I think the whole fan base is feeling that after these playoffs. Um, Even though we won in 5 against Cleveland, a lot of our postseason offense, was kind of the same as it was in the regular season, but less transition. We rely so much on transition to get easier buckets. Um, we definitely grinded it out tonight, tough shot after tough shot. But 12 turnovers to the Miami 7 was my big factor in terms of tonight. Rebounding was about the same. Knicks 41. I think the Heat pulled in 40. So it was basically even, but the fast break points, you know, like tonight was just a complete grinded out. 6 at fast break points apiece, but the Knicks had a 14-point lead in this game to the Heat's 9 was the biggest lead. Um, but points in the paint, again, it was all jump shooting to EJ's point. 20 points in the paint for the Knicks to the Miami Heat's 38. So that's indicative of this loss. They almost doubled us in points in the paint, and we've got to find better ways to generate offense. Mitchell Robinson had one possession actually where we hadn't even seen it all season. He was in a situation where he needed to put it up and post up because literally everyone was covered and the shot clock winding down. We heard Richard Jefferson talk about it all the time, EJ. Some of the possessions were like down to the final second.
Yeah, I mean, and that's where like really like we could have an intense conversation about the Knicks' offensive creativity. Um, and part of the issue that we saw, and it was really exposed tonight, is that one, there was very little ball
Mm.
movement, very little ball movement. The other component to it is that there's very little player movement. Um, Aside from Quentin Grimes, often there was very little players moving from one baseline to the other side. And that's for a team like Miami, you're now making their job incredibly easy.
Mm.
One of the things that Miami, when you look at Bam tonight, Bam Adebayo's play tonight, one of the reasons why Miami was able to get the win, and I would say this too, Jimmy Butler had an okay game. It wasn't a spectacular game, but it was really Bam tonight, and one of the reasons why is because Bam illustrated like in terms of covering Bam, there was this inability to understand what he was going to be doing. Was he going to present from the free throw line or the free throw line extended, and or was he going to create a move that would get him to the inside the paint and get an easy dunk or to be in the dunker's position? Um, that kind of that kind of 4 or 5 on your roster, it's hard to cover that. It's hard for defenses to
Mm.
decide how are we going to cover this. And so not only did we make it easy for Miami in terms of not really moving the ball so they didn't have to rotate as much, but they did the opposite for us, where it's like, okay, well, we're going to show you what it's like to have ball movement. We're going to show you what it's like to have multiple positions, multiple players who you have to pick your poison and choose who you're going to defend. Tonight, I mean, by the fourth quarter, it was clear the adjustments were overload on Brunson and wait for him to try to dribble, drive, penetrate, and see what he can do with it, especially
Mm.
late in the shot clock.
Yeah.
So that's why we saw like the offense just really grind down to a halt. And I mean that makes what Brunson did really impressive, but it also shows that for us to take the next step, you need players
Yeah.
who move, you need players who cut, you need players who force defenders to have to defend.
Yeah. You're on the money, like you are always. And I feared we would get a big Bam game, and this was the big Bam game. Not enough from our centers, but ultimately, you look at RJ and Randall's efficiency, their production, the way they play. My biggest concern heading in was their fit, in terms of floor spacing. And we see the Knicks play improved when Quentin Grimes came into the unit. But when he's not in the unit with Josh Hart, with Barrett, with Randall, I mean, that's what we're going to get. It's literally pack the paint. And if it wasn't for a couple of Obi, remember when they made that big run in the third and Obi kept us alive, splashed a couple of three balls, the game could have actually, in fact, been blown out then. But we kept in touch, because unfortunately you couldn't afford to even sit Brunson 5 minutes tonight if you're
Yeah.
trying to win this game. And I think we're a couple of pieces in terms of starting and bench away from reaching that Eastern Conference Finals, NBA Finals level. Um, let's say we had Emmanuel Quickly tonight. We have a player like, you know, Alec Burks that can, Terrence Ross, just a guy who can spot up off the bench and provide a bit more offense, shot create.
Yeah.
And then another, like a Duncan Robinson, a floor spacing wing in the starting unit. And then I think we're in business. So I don't think we're that far away. It just, we all know the names. We know where we fell short tonight. And, we can talk about their stats and everything. But um, the positive thing, EJ, is some of them are young. You know, we know Barrett's limitations, but Quentin Grimes made me very proud in this playoffs. Barrett stepped up in some big moments, but I know some of his weaknesses got to improve in terms of handling the rock.
Yeah. I mean, all of this analysis is with the caveat and CT and I knowing that, again, we I was there. I was on the podcast. We did it with Berman. We did the preseason expectations and predictions, and none of us had the Knicks going to the second round and facing the Miami Heat. Again, venerable Bill Daughtry said he's not in the prediction game because most of us when we predict, there's so many variables that can change at any time. So all of these critiques, all of this analysis comes with the understanding, like, yes, we're celebrating the fact that the Knicks, they surpassed our expectations. But the great thing about this loss tonight is that it really showed what do we need to get to that next level. It really showed us that, okay, it's possible, it's plausible. Especially because we talked about this throughout the course of like the months of March and April, right before the playoffs
Yep,
started.
facts.
There are teams that are in a wasteland. Toronto is going to have a new coach. We've talked about Charlotte, we talked about Chicago. The East is shifting. The East might change. There have been some rumblings with regards to Giannis and Milwaukee. I don't know how much we're going to buy or sell those rumors. However, in as much as we lost tonight and we lost this series, um, you need these kinds of series. You need RJ to see what is it
Yeah,
like in the playoffs, what kind of legs you're going to need to make a serious run. You're gonna need. We needed to see what Julius Randle was because almost every season there's been something that's been the counter argument. So in 2020, there were questions as to how legitimate that season was because it was the bubble season. It was the bubble. It was the pandemic playoffs. 2021, 20 into 2022, we started to question, was the 2020, 2021 version of Randall the real one, or was it last season's version of Randall that was the real one? And now we've gotten a larger sample size and an opportunity to really, really see what does Julius Randle offer in the playoffs. Is it analogous to what he offered in the regular season? All of this will better inform Leon Rose and his team of what they need to do in the off season, and especially with the idea that we didn't know. I don't know if anyone predicted that we would make it to this far this season.
yeah. The funny thing is about tonight, and this is a question I like to ask a lot, EJ. Did anything surprise you? And for me personally, it's gone exactly how the season has gone. Nothing on the Knicks side surprised me tonight. How about you?
Tonight, no. Tonight, like
Hmm.
I have a whole bunch of people who know that that we do Knicks Buzz, and I have a whole bunch of people in my life who know that I'm a lifelong Knicks fan. And they're texting me. They're like, "Oh, make sure that he's all right. Make sure that EJ's all right." And I responded, I'm fine. And in part, I'm fine. Not that I'm happy that the Knicks lost. Of course, I'm not happy. But if you're a Knicks fan, if you're a Knicks Buzz and you watch Knicks Buzz, if you're here for all 82, you know that CT and I watch every game and we're conversing with you guys, and we understand this team really well. We know their strengths, we know their limitations. This is a team that, for as much as it overachieved, When you overachieve, that means that there are some spots that people looked at you initially and said, yeah, I don't trust this aspect of your rotation. I don't trust this aspect of the roster. When we go back to the preseason, when we go back to the preseason prediction, you guys have the tape, it's on YouTube. Check it out. One of the first things we talked about was shooting. Are we going to have sufficient shooting from the wing position? Are we going to have sufficient scoring from that position? We talked about floor spacing with regards to Brunson, Randle, and Barrett. And some of these things, we were able, especially in April, late March into April, we were able to mask those things, especially with the acquisition of Josh Hart. However, those same looming concerns manifested themselves in the Miami Heat series. So,
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure Leon Rose and company, they were aware of we need shooting. We need offensive creatives. We need disruptive 3 and D guy.
yeah, most def. But actually, I made a mistake. There is one thing that surprised me. The shooting on the Miami Heat side. We know they're not a good shooting team, but to sit here right now and say we held the Miami Heat to 25% from three in this game, I'd have been like, man, that's butter, perfect. You know, let's go out win. Let's win this game. But that still wasn't enough. Because our offense was that anemic. I mean, it's just frustrating, man. No Derrick Rose in this series, no Fournier. The Emmanuel Quickly thing is just you're just frustrated to the ends of the earth because this was a series he definitely could have helped us in the last few games.
Yeah.
Um, a player that's so pivotal, and I'm not sitting here and blaming the series on injuries because we had a chance to still win. But when the dust has settled, and I look back in this off season and I just keep thinking about it, IQ was a big part of why we were successful this season.
Hmm.
And to not be able to see him in the final three, I think it was three playoff games when, he really would have helped. But that also lets me know if I'm Leon Rose, that's how much we rely on a guy like that. And I know you can question his playoff performance, absolutely. But out of all the guys, I trust Emmanuel quickly more to figure things out. He puts in the work. The shot's there. It's not broken. He's just got to, get more comfortable, get more experience in the playoffs. Yeah, so he's a key piece. And, we didn't get any minutes out of production out of Miles McBride, the Hart, the Obi, the bench unit with RJ. RJ was unable to run the offense and
Yeah.
not collapse
Yeah.
late. So that was my first big moment of the game, EJ. That third quarter was the first time tonight where I felt like we may not win.
Hmm.
How did you see
Um,
it? The swings of tonight.
the obviously that first quarter, there was lots of hope. There was lots of exuberance. Particularly because if you watch the NBA, if you're not just a Knicks fan but you're an NBA fan, in your mind you might be thinking, oh, this might be similar to what transpired with the Celtics and Philadelphia. That it's possible to be a home team while you're on the road for Game 6. Um, However, after that first quarter, um, you really saw things start to slow down. I started seeing that things started slowing down, and I started to feel as if once the Heat were able to chip away at the lead, um, there were times where the Knicks really beat themselves more than the Heat beat the Knicks. I'll just say it that way.
Oh man,
Um,
say that again.
like when you look at quarters 2 through 4, there were ways in which the Knicks beat themselves, and it really wasn't the Heat who beat the Knicks. And it was the same stuff that we've been talking about for the better part of the second half of the season. Missed free throws. Was that a surprise to anyone? Silly mental errors. When is the last time you've watched an NBA playoff game and there have been two free throw lane violations by the same team? That's almost unheard of. Like, it's not a common occurrence to see a free throw lane violation. That's not something that happens often. The mindless turnovers that took place, especially in the fourth quarter. Um, you know, I mean, the list is a pretty long list. Closing out, like the Knicks have there's an abundance of episodes where you can see the Knicks closing out after a rotation, and almost always they overshoot their responsibility. They always overshoot their man, and so that then further creates rotational issues in terms of covering for outside shooting. So,
Yeah,
think about how many times we saw either Caleb Martin or Kyle Lowry or Duncan Robinson with pretty open shots. And that was almost always because they overshot their rotation switch, and it ends up leading to these amazing shot opportunities for the Heat. In as much as the Heat have to make those shots, but that's the function of just poor rotations. Um, so again, was this surprising to me? No, not really, because we've seen this. We've seen this before. We know our Knicks, and they kind of did what they did, what they do.
that's it. Yeah, we're indicative of Tom Thibodeau in a way, which got us some success, but has also put a cap, I think, on where we could get to this season. And I've starred a few comments, questions that we'll bring up. Joseph J. Just evaluating Tibbs tonight, and I'll ask EJ this sort of outlook, and we'll talk about a lot more in the autopsy. But just initial thoughts tonight. I thought, yeah, Tom Thibodeau made a few mistakes tonight. Um, Obviously leaving Brunson and that bench unit too long. We were in a fantastic position in the game, solid position, solid lead, and you go back to the Deuce McBride situation. I thought we saw enough of Deuce in the last game to know that he's not capable of handling an offense in this environment, especially on the road. The second big mistake I thought Tibbs did was doubling late, double teaming a lot, something we hadn't seen a lot this season. So I'm questioning why did he want to throw that in right now? Was it to get the better of Jimmy Butler? There seemed to be a little bit something personal there. Don't let Jimmy beat us. But Jimmy wasn't really killing us. He was living at the line, but he wasn't really beating us in field goals. EJ. So yeah, Tom Thibodeau. I'm of the mindset that he's a good coach. He can get a team to compete hard, be in positions to win games, but it comes down to execution. He either, for me, needs to get an offensive coordinator or become less rigid. But yeah, he made some mistakes tonight. What do you see?
I mean, I think this is part of the issue is um, the offense
Mm,
lacks creativity. In a league that in the past eight, or I mean, really since the ascent of the Golden State Warriors, obviously we can go back to Mike D'Antoni's Phoenix Suns, but in a league that really since the Golden State Warriors emphasizes offense, the Knicks just lack that creativity offensively. And part of it is that there's really a lack of motion. It's just so ISO heavy at times that, again, against a better defensive team, it just doesn't work as consistently. The offense will grind to a halt, and I know that to an extent that's Tom Thibodeau's um, that's his philosophy. But then to a certain extent, it's also it's also part of the roster construction. You know, one of the things I laugh at, that amuses me as being part of the Knicks fan base is when the Knicks were down 3 games to 1,
mm,
we had to go back to the same arguments we've been making all season. Throw this guy in, throw this guy in. I mean, we were begging for Evan Fournier, but we know who Evan Fournier is as a player. Like Evan Fournier lights it up in terms sometimes lights it up in terms of his three point prowess, but at the same time, we also know he's a defensive turnstile. So it's almost as if like we're in a catch 22 position here, where yes, the offense is way too predictable. The offense doesn't create any spacing. Um, but at the same time, we have pieces that just really are ISO heavy. Like our three top players are ISO heavy. Brunson is ISO heavy, Randall is ISO heavy, Barrett is ISO heavy. Is that a function of the coach? Is that a function of the front office? It's really a combination of both. And so I do agree with almost everyone in the chat. Like that part of the issue is that we need pieces that better complement what we believe to be the anchor pieces or the core pieces of this roster moving forward.
Yeah, I love your rational points. Obviously Tom looks at a roster and he's like, look, we need to play this way, perhaps to get the best out of it. So there is certainly roster limitations that I 100% agree with. And I'm kind of 50-50, as in I would if we tried to make an upgrade for a different kind of coach, I wouldn't be upset. If we kept Tibbs, but we gave him a better roster with more versatility, then I would give him another year to see. But there are, yeah, some shortcomings that I'm not the biggest fan of. In terms of that. But he knows Brunson, and we know we've got an incredible weapon now in the playoffs. Boy, was Brunson absolutely clutch. I mean, there was a moment even when there was a violation or a timeout, and he hoisted the three ball, and it was still went in. So I was like, that's
I was
frustrating.
I was
Brunson was
praying they were
hot.
going to count that.
Yeah.
I was praying they
Um,
counted that.
Also, I want to salute to Brunson's the way he battled defensively tonight. We put on a really good defensive performance. We battled through screens. We fought. We avoided giving them a lot of open looks. There was a couple late with Strauss, and the Kevin Love three were very timely for the Heat. But to hold them to shooting 28, 29% from three, we did our job. We did our job defensively tonight. We just did not step up offensively. Um, Now, yeah, anything you want to add?
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and that's why, like, I think for many of us in this chat, we're conflicted. Like, I think
Mm,
tonight, the temperature of Knicks Nation is we're conflicted because we are frustrated that the Knicks lost tonight. Because I think there's a general sense, and I can just tell me in the chat if you think this is true. I think many of us in this chat, after watching this game or while watching this game, thought it was very conceivable that we could win this game. I think many people in the chat thought at
mm,
some point during the game we could win this game. But then what's really conflicting is that we lost in a very Knicks fashion because we did very Knicksian things. Um, so to have the ability to hold the heat to a really like a really pedestrian offensive shooting performance tonight. But the Knicksian thing is that even though the Heat had some really poor shooting numbers, they hit the shots when they needed to hit the shots, and often they hit the shots because poor
mm,
rotations, or
yeah,
players open. Um, there's a couple of shots that the Heat made because again, like you could see at certain points, um, instead of gang rebounding, people think that the play is over, and it's like, all right, let me think offense without having secured the rebound. Like there definitely was a play late third quarter, uh, yeah, frustrating Kyle Lowry
oh,
ends up with the offensive rebound. Like that should, I could
yeah,
feel Clyde saying this because he would say this if he were on air.
yeah.
The smallest guy on the court should not end up with an offensive rebound.
He was actually shown on the screen shaking.
Yeah, because you
He
could see him.
was,
He was like just
yeah,
frustrated, and that's not a function of Kyle Lowry, being the best player in that moment. That was a function of a mental lapse where players
yeah,
just thought the play was over, and that invariably leads to second chance points. And of course, you're going to score with an extra possession.
yeah. I think that just speaks the fact that we still played tight, but it speaks to Brunson's leadership again. Why we were even in this game late, and I feel like with him, with a talent upgrade, best believe he is that piece to help us compete for a championship. Um, Obviously, Quentin Grimes had a big open look late, but I thought he rushed that one in the corner. He had more time. Ended up being that air ball. Um, but I said to you recently, and I've been thinking it for a while, you could see how torn Brunson is, EJ, in terms of getting his teammate involved or taking the open look because he trusts himself being able to hit it. And I think that what went through his mind in that final play, he was like, "Oh, I'm doubled, but could I try and get out of it?" And I'm at the cup, and then he just hesitated a little bit too late. So I think we bring in a talent upgrade, more shooting, and I think yeah, we're good. And some great quotes from Jalen Brunson. Um, why don't you surmise your thoughts on Julius Randle at the moment, and then we'll touch on RJ Barrett.
Um, Julius Randle. What do we say about him? I mean, um, no,
Take
I'm
your
serious.
time.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I don't know what to say. Like, I think he perfectly embodies
Mm.
the roller coaster nature of this particular season. To have been awarded an NBA All Star slot and to have been awarded an All NBA um, recognition. But then, as almost everyone in the chat has said, um, we didn't have that kind of Julius Randle play this particular round in the playoffs. It's funny because, like, CT and I have been podcasting together here for a while, and um, on the last show I was on, I think this was for Game Four. One of the questions I raised was, well, we have to figure out why Randall is playing this way. Is this who Julius Randall is during the playoffs, or have we not seen him maximize his potential? And some people thought that I was defending Julius. I'm not defending Julius Randle. I'm not. I'm as frustrated as everyone else, if not more, because we have to get on this podcast and for not just an hour, maybe an hour or two, talk about our favorite team and often to talk about them after a loss.
Mm.
If Julius Randle doesn't show up or doesn't have a good game, chances are we're going to lose. And that's what happened tonight. And there's but so much, every time Jalen Brunson took a shot, like you thought it was good. Every time Julius Randle took a shot, you just thought to yourself, oh, this is not going to be good. There's no way, no matter if you think Julius Randle's our top player or is our second player, if he has the kind of game that he had tonight, we can't win it. We can't win a game. We can't win a game on the road where the only offensive threat in our starting rotation is Jalen Brunson. And, I can only imagine, like on Sports Talk Radio, on this podcast, on other Knicks content creator spaces, we're going to hear a lot of people go back to post 2021, 2022. It's time to get rid of Randall.
Mm.
And this is difficult. This is difficult to figure
Yeah.
out what to do with him, but he definitely did not show up in the
No.
manner necessary for an elimination game tonight.
Yeah. Definitely. I got so much to add, the wise words that you said about Julius, and there are so much that I appreciate him as a player. Raising his game and achieving some of these accolades, All NBA, All Star, and his consistency, his ability to play through injuries, his ability to fight in the regular season. So none of that is anything to do with my thoughts about potentially moving on from Julius or exploring what's out there. I'm not on the trade him at all costs kind of boat yet. I'm like, okay, let's continue to run as an organization. He's young enough. Um, Talent upgrade first, see how it works. But there's real concerns because playoff ball we've seen is so different. So, shout out to Randall for raising his game to where he's at, from 3, 4 years ago, and he's still, an asset. I consider him still an asset, but at the same time, it's not just the short sample size now. it's 3 years of ball. So for my critique on Randall, specifically on my evaluation, is how he's looked as in with this team for 3 years. It's not tonight. It's not a few days ago. It's not at certain points in the season. It's like, okay, with his flaws and his game, is that something that we can win with other pieces? That's the everything I'm considering. And I'll go back to the point about Julius's scouting report, coming into the league with LA, with the Pelicans. He always was never a high motor defender, you know, lackadaisical defender, or, loses interest at parts of the game. That hasn't just been a New York Knicks thing. That's been part of Julius Randle's scouting report since he came into the league, and
Preach.
possibly reasons why former clubs gave up on him. People might be looking at them as stupid at some points, like, why did they give up on Julius Randle? Well, now you see, because a leopard don't always change its spots, or may never change its spots. So you could raise your game like Randle's done, pick up the shooting, the effort, the efficiency, all of that. But some parts of a player's scouting report will follow them wherever they go, you know? So is he engaged defender? No. Can he lose attention at some points in time? Absolutely. When the moment's big, I don't know if he was ever tested in LA or Pelicans, because that wasn't a situation where they were ever able to see him in that situation. So we fast forward to now after 3 years, and everyone's on the table for me except Jalen Brunson. It's not just Randall, but yeah, the critique there is pretty clear. It's low hanging fruit for me at this stage, man. Thoughts?
I mean, you offer a lot there. I mean, it's and also the perspective of if we look at Julius as a Laker and Julius as a Pelican, and we're
Mm,
discussing the issues of being low motor on defense. The issue is that you can't have Julius be low motor on defense and RJ struggle on defense, and then
mm,
combine that with Mitchell Robinson, who's a net negative on the offense. And Quentin Grimes is unproven. We have aspirations for what Quentin Grimes might be, but the Julius question is something that even as we try to answer it, it's amplified by all those other things that I've mentioned. Julius's inability to perform thus far, notices that everyone, and thus far in the playoffs, is made more complicated by the fact that RJ has defensive issues and mental lapses as well, is confounded by the fact that we're almost always playing 4-on-5 on offense when we have Mitch in the paint. Um,
mm.
it's confounded. It's amplified by Quentin Grimes, and his development is still taking place. And he's quick. He has very quick release, sometimes a little bit too fast. So I think many of you guys are starting to. We've reached the point where we ask the question. He has these accolades. He now has a resume, a body of work that has proven itself to be of the top 20-25 players of the NBA during the regular season. But after the season, our aspirations have changed. We're no longer discussing, oh, I hope we make the playoffs. Now, after the season, our expectations are that we are going to be in the playoffs. That's now the expectation. The expectations have changed. At the start of the season, we were hoping, wishing, and saying play in. Now, start of 2023, 2024, we're going to be talking about playoffs.
Mm.
We're going to be imagining. We're not, like many of us as Knicks fans are going to skip over the first round because the expectations now are at least second round. Um, so
Great points.
the question that we now ask is Julius Randle one of those individuals we can imagine being on that roster? It's hard. It's hard to say. It's really hard to say because, in as much as he's not an old player, the mental stuff, right? I think there's a component to that it's hard to predict where that's going to go, and I don't know. I really don't know. I really don't know.
Yeah, lots to work through. But first things first, after chopping up tonight's loss and how we lost and the series and the playoffs, but the season in general for me has been a success for everyone, because of everyone. You know, we don't just get here because of one dude. So salute again to all the hard work and effort everyone's put in, the sacrifice, the trade for Josh Hart from Leon Rose. You know, made some mistakes with some of the contracts. Fournier being a complete minus the whole season hurt because I think that's a big piece that could have got us. I mean, his salary could contribute to a big piece getting us to the next round. So you consider $30 million with Rose and Fournier sitting on the bench. There's a lot of room for improvement. A lot of room for improvement. Good friend Mark Berman of the show, friend of the show, who we should have on next week to talk about in this autopsy, just tweets out, for the first time in ages, the Knicks enter the off season with an all-star point guard in the
Oh
fold
yeah,
for
yeah,
years.
yeah.
And after the great season, Leon Rose has a lot of decisions to make on the rest of the roster to raise the ceiling. Will be a huge off season. So yeah, success, but ability to build on this. Now, if there isn't a trade that's suitable, you keep Julius, but you explore your options. Roster versatility in this league is huge, EJ. When you look at teams like the Phoenix Suns, the Milwaukee Bucks, the New York Knicks
Yeah.
season lasted longer than the Phoenix Suns and the Milwaukee Bucks. So we say this all the time, but 29 teams are unsuccessful.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean it's a failure, maybe for some contenders, but for 29 teams, it's unsuccessful. But that doesn't mean that you can't build and that the season, some parts weren't a success. So how would you rate this season as a whole if you were to give it, a grade or a rating?
It's easily a B plus season.
Hmm.
Um, because there definitely was a lot of growth this season. Um, the roster surpassed all expectations.
Hmm.
We also saw players develop. Whenever you see players you drafted develop, and to be in the conversation of end of season accolades, you've had a good season. You've had a good season. Because developing players in this league is a very complicated business. I think many of us as sports fans, we rush the process. We think just drafting a player is the panacea. It's going to solve everything. That's not true. We saw it with, for example, Philadelphia and Markel Fultz. Markel Fultz was a top draft pick who didn't pan out, and that happens in the league all the time. And so to see the Knicks have a couple of players who took a leap, and particularly in Emmanuel quickly taking a quantum leap, in the words of the great Clyde Frazier. But at the same time, there were some moments of concern. I mentioned earlier at the start of the podcast the Oklahoma City game and how many moments it just seemed as if the Knicks didn't have their heart in this season. Um, still figuring out what to do with you know uh, Evan Fournier and Derrick Rose and their money. Um, Not quite developing Obi Toppin or seeing or envisioning a more defined role for him aside from 12 minutes a game, or mop up duty. So there were some really strong wins, um, and but there's some question marks. And some of these question marks are such that I can't then make it an A season. Um, Leon
Yep.
Rose hit a home run with the Josh Hart trade, but still the same man who signed Evan Fournier, and Evan Fournier didn't see action for close to 2 months, if not more.
Yeah. That was some big bad decisions. But for me, EJ, chat fam, we take you back to the big summer, the Spider Mitchell talks. So, to me, in reflecting on how this season went and giving my grade, and also considering, that move where we didn't get Spider, it's kind of tough to think about, how we would look with another big shot maker, which we now know you need in the playoffs. But I still feel like the fact that we got to the second round without pushing all of our chips in the middle of that table to get Spider was the right deal, the right move not to make. So I salute Leon for that and the patience. And now what we're sitting on is still that war chest of guys, pieces. IQ raised his trade stock this year. Obi Toppin would still have some fans around the league. Quentin Grimes definitely raised his trade stock as well. And, from last year, you could say Julius Randle has probably raised his trade stock also. So, given the fact that he didn't make that move for Spider, EJ, and we have all those assets still, are you more at peace with that decision? Regardless of how you felt at the time, now we can reflect on making the second round.
I was actually at peace with not making the Donovan Mitchell trade um,
Mm.
when it didn't happen, when he was traded to Cleveland. I was shocked that he was traded to Cleveland. But if you guys remember, and thank you so much, Will. Thank you so much. Thank you for riding with us so much, man. But if you remember during the course of the offseason, one of the things I was harping on, this was like my point, was that the assets and that were being just tossed around, starting with DeJounte Murray, and as you guys know, I'm about to drop it again. The Rudy Gobert trade just didn't make any sense to me, and that created a high leverage situation where a team like the Knicks, you can't get if the amounts of assets that were being tossed around in last season's off season rather, pardon me. Um, if the amount of assets that were being tossed around were that high, the Knicks can't miss. You can't miss. You can't mess up that kind of acquisition. So it's better that the Knicks didn't make that trade because, as we've seen with Rudy Gobert, and obviously Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell are two very different players, but it would have hamstrung us, like, getting Donovan Mitchell. And just because Donovan Mitchell is an all-star, an all NBA player, does not necessarily mean that was the perfect fit. So I'm okay with the fact that we didn't get Donovan Mitchell, um, especially because, like I said, at the start of the preseason, I didn't get a lot right this year, but I did say this: not getting Donovan Mitchell would allow us to see what we really had in Jalen Brunson. I don't know if we have Jalen Brunson having the kind of season he had this year if he has to share the ball with Donovan Mitchell.
Yeah, that's a great point. The final thought you just said, in terms of we saw it with Trey Young, DeJounte Murray, we saw it with KD and Booker. I'm a big fan of having more complementary players and not just players that all need the ball. We already got an issue with RJ Barrett to take his next level to his game to the next level needs the ball. Randall needs the ball. Um, Brunson, you definitely want the ball in his hand now. So I think we go into the off season, fam, all thinking very similar. Obviously, Nick fans got their own way of wanting to build this thing, but we have a clear aim and guidance now. We got kind of like a map now we can all follow. Jalen Brunson is that dude. Brun Sim. Now, there's going to be t-shirts all over 7th Avenue, EJ, and all over the New York subway with Jalen Brun Sim and all that. Slam Magazine tees, all of that. He is an icon now in New York
Yeah,
City.
yeah, yeah. He's um this is his team. I don't at the
Preach.
start of this season we were debating if this was Randall's team or RJ's team. No, this is Jalen Brunson's team. And what's great, and will again, shout out to you. I see your point. Um, we are a top 8 at the end of this season. We're a top 8 team in the league. Now, what that also means, though, is not only do we have our point guard for the foreseeable future, but we have him on an incredibly manageable contract. So it might already be a steal of a deal for the Knicks, for the
Or
contract that Brunson has signed.
a bargain.
Um, it's a bargain basement. Well, first, the other thing too is that this really shows how one deal, one deal can really alter the fate of an organization.
Free agent deal.
A free agent deal. Now, think
Yeah.
about this. Not only did the Brunson deal change the fate of the Knicks organization, it changed the fate of the Mavericks organization because they could have had him for an even more reasonable contract, conceivably. He's already underpaid, in my opinion. Sorry, he's already underpaid. So I do think that that's the thing that we have to hold on to, even though this tonight is frustrating. We have a point guard, and it's been a long time since we've been able to say that. A very long time. There are people on this chat who can't remember, who are like in their 20s, who can't remember a competent point guard.
It's been that long, and it's been an absolute A plus 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 home run for Leon Rose and co. Beautiful
Yeah,
thing is just 26 years old as well, growing in his maturation and game. And I like RJ Barrett taking some ownership too tonight. That's some growth. EJ, he said he played terrible. Um, turnovers hurt. I don't just blame one guy on tonight, but certainly if we got more from Barrett and we got more from Julius Randle, because the thing is, everyone has their own opinion and they're welcome to that on certain players, and we see it, all 82. But the players that get paid more are just going to be the ones to get more critique. It's just the way it goes, right? We're not picking on Randall, we're not picking on RJ. It's when you take on and you sign that contract in all of sports, this don't just apply to New York Knicks. You hold yourself in a position where you can be fairly critiqued. You're earning maximum money, right? Now, it's also a fault of the front office for evaluating a certain player that deserves max money, but it's the fan base that can hold them accountable. Improve, go into the off season. I want to see some improvement on some weaknesses, right? Julius Randle's game's pretty legit, right? You don't just become third all team NBA for no reason, all star, right? Improve on your clutch situations, right? Go to the gym and don't shoot in an empty gym, shoot when there's double teams coming at you. Practice with the crowd noise amplified, you know, watch film and see where you could pass to your teammates faster. Those kind of things. And for RJ Barrett, practice those dribble handle moves. Yeah, keeping your head up. Only dribble in the gym with your head up. Look at film again. Emmanuel
yeah.
quickly came back a better player. EJ, there's no reason these guys can't.
If you can point to Nice's comment,
Mm,
um, that speaks to it. Um, we say it all the time. Basketball isn't just physical; it's mental. It's the intelligence. It's the emotion. One of the things I love about one of the reasons why I have no problem now calling Jalen Brunson a great point guard is he
mm,
plays with a lot of emotion, but he doesn't get out of control. And that's one of the reasons why he's such a great player is that he has the ability to play with an energy but and emotion, but it's a focused emotion. And so like yeah, like I mean to go back into like the Knicks history and to have a position that we now know there's no question about it. And this is really hard for a lot of us who are younger Knicks fans who never saw the Charlie Ward Knicks the Charlie Ward Knicks run, or never saw the Derek Harper Knicks run, or who was unfortunate enough to see Mark Jackson. Guys, like there are some
mm.
people on this chat who only know Mark Jackson as an analyst on ESPN/ABC and not understand that he actually was a phenomenal point guard. and for a portion of his career played for the New York Knicks, was drafted by the New York Knicks, and came from St. John's University. Um, but what that then means is that we need other players to have that level of intelligence and that level of introspection to be able to say, okay, this team has the ability to contend. What can I do to raise my ceiling? For example, with RJ and Julius, and I don't quote him very often, but Stephen A. Smith has been saying this for the past 2 seasons. Why haven't those two players developed more of an offensive game using their right hands? Almost everything they do is go to the left, go to the left, go to the left. You you know, introspection would tell you that, you want to have as many tricks in your bag as possible to pull out, to leave the defense guessing, to leave rotations guessing in terms of what you need to do. If the three doesn't fall for RJ, I need you to develop a floater. I need you to develop a shot that has more control as opposed to just simply trying to draw the foul. This league, refs are smart and they've gotten hip to how many actors there are who are professional basketball players. And
Yep.
notice the way I said it, I didn't say how many basketball players who are actors. I said how many actors who are basketball players. Because this whole flopping generation, this whole, like, let me try to whine and complain for every call. That's not good. I've never ever seen a ref change a call because a player whined.
Mm.
So ultimately, it's about your ability to make the ball go into the basket. So maybe RJ needs a strong floater, not just trying to muscle up every shot from the left.
Yep. Yeah, you're right, man. Simple things, and RJ Barrett's still so young. And if you think about it in the grand scheme of things with RJ, it's the second playoff series in under 22 years of age. So a lot of film, a lot of experience RJ will learn from and will get better at. So he's shown me enough to stick around in these playoffs. Yep. Um, but also it's about looking at yourself in the mirror, like EJ says, understanding that, hey, my flaws are I argue a lot. It lets me get out of my head, in terms of the game. One thing you mentioned about referees never changing the call. I don't know if people realize this. They do this in soccer, international soccer as well, but they ban the replay on the big screen. If there's any controversial decision or moment, they will not play it on the screen. And I think a lot of basketballers tend to wait for the replay. They look up and they're like waiting and they're trying to argue the point still, which allows it to continue and go on, and
exactly,
they don't move on to the next play.
exactly. That's a brilliant point. That's a brilliant point. And that's part of the intelligence. The part of the intelligence of basketball is okay. That plays over. What could I have gotten from the play and move on to the next play? And like we've seen this a bunch of times, like with Julius, for example, where he doesn't get a call that he thinks he deserves, and the next play has already begun. He's talking to refs, or he's like coming back on defensive really slowly. And and almost always there's a timeout afterwards, and Julius is going to go talk to the ref. And I understand the art of working the ref. I understand that. But here's the issue: every Nick can't work the ref, and you can't work the refs every single
Mm,
game, every single play, every single second. It just doesn't work. And so
yeah.
I think that's like, for example, and I don't want to make it an us versus them or a this guy versus this guy thing. One of the reasons why I think Jalen Brunson has captured the hearts of so many Knicks fans, and why you see so many of his jerseys just around MSG or around the city, um, is in part because when he's on the court, there are times where you're wondering, like, does this guy speak?
Man.
And I think that sometimes players don't understand that those kinds of players who play with that kind of quiet, reserved intensity they warrant more respect out of other players and out of referees. Because
Mm.
when Jalen Brunson says something, the refs are more likely to be like, you know what, let me think about that. But if it's every play, it's just
Yeah,
easy to tune out. It's the law of diminishing returns.
facts. Yeah, it gets tiring from hearing from
Yeah.
them. But that actually, for me, crazy as it sounds, that is second in terms of my pet peeve. It's argue with the ref when there's a timeout or a dude shooting free throws. But we know who they are, but they'll argue when the play is still a live
Oh
ball.
yeah, yeah. Oh
I'm
yeah.
like,
Oh yeah.
man, get back. The play's
Yeah.
down. The play's developing, and you're still under the bucket arguing. Like,
Yeah.
come on, man. Like the cameras everywhere. Everyone's seeing it, and I'm saying that's what's going to get your game to the next level, right?
Yeah.
As a player, and Julius Randle's got all the physical and capabilities in the world. But if he's third team All NBA, his goal should be to get to second team
Yeah.
All NBA. His goal should be, I want to get to first team All NBA because you're that good. You're just that close to being in the top 10, top 15 if you take your approach to the next level. And for a dude who played with the late great Kobe Bryant and would have learnt a hell of a lot from him, but I hope he clicks in that regard in terms of, man, do I just want to be a perennial All Star, third team All NBA? I'm 28 years old, or do I want to be an NBA champion? Do I want to be a second or first team All NBA? Do I want to be a New York Knicks legend with my name and jersey hanging in the rafters? Those are the questions a player in his position should be asking himself right now.
Bro, CT, my brother, brilliantly said. But
Mm,
I don't think that that's something that every play like I don't think that every player wants it. And I'm not saying that this is about Julius Randle per se. It's not something that every NBA player wants. It's not necessarily something that every player understands. And a player might want it, but sometimes they don't know how to do it. And sometimes a player might want it, but they might want it inconsistent. They might want it inconsistently. The thing that
yep.
separated like a Kobe with a bunch of other players is it wasn't just his talent, it was his drive, and he was maniacal. Like he was maniacal in terms of his drive. Kobe was someone who was played at the age of 37, 38, who still thought in his mind he was as good as he was when he was 18. However, he also approached it with this idea of I might still think that I can do what I did when I was 18, but I still want to build according to what my 38-year-old body could do. And that's not a mentality that a lot of players have. Jordan had that, obviously. Like I think that's just something that kind of intelligence and that kind of drive and that kind of introspection is something that's saved for the best of the best. Like I'll just use a quick example, um, and we could have this argument one day. Melo, I'm really gonna get myself into trouble with this one, but whatever.
Hey, go in.
Um, Melo had the ability to be a much greater offensive player than LeBron. He had way more bags. He had more tricks and just scoring potential than LeBron. Please understand what I'm saying. I'm saying scoring potential. I'm not saying
Yep.
all of the elements of being a basketball player. But one of the things that you could always just say about Melo is that did he have the maniacal drive that LeBron has had in terms of the other stuff that allows you to be that otherworldly talent? And I think that's the thing that might be missing from some of our players is that they want to be good, they might want to be great, but they might want to be great inconsistently.
Yep. And I want to just add to what that point you said about selfishness also. I have reason to believe, and sometimes where I feel like players flay their arms up and they want the ball a lot. Like for me, the players we've got that's not named Jalen Brunson. You're a co-star. Get used to that. Like there ain't nothing wrong. You could still be a star, but right now you're a co-star. Um, players wanting to get theirs, and you take your turn, I take my turn, kind of thing. That needs to be figured out by Tibbs, by Leon, all of that. Because yeah, we have a great chance to win tonight, force a game 7, and get to the Eastern Conference Finals. But I felt like Jalen Brunson just deferred a little bit at the wrong times, and of course, no bench production. I think Emmanuel quickly steps in. I think, and you mentioned the keyword expectations now, EJ. Like, let me ask you, what, just as of where we're at right now, this moment, what are your expectations for next season, given the fact we were a bounce away from getting to the Eastern Conference Finals?
My expectations are is that the Knicks really make a significant. Um, they investigate really seriously multiple moves or potential moves to upgrade the roster. And I'm not talking about like just tinkering along the edges. I think that next year is really this coming off season will be an off season where the Knicks will be active, not necessarily successful, but active in terms of trying to find a more natural pairing for Jalen Brunson. And from there, I think the expectation will be at least second round of the playoffs. I think the expectations will be a fourth seed, um, and in part because once you get that guy, whomever that guy may be, who is a offensive creator, who you get a 3 and D, you finally get a clear 3 and D wing. It now a lot of those holes that existed, they're closed, and now you're in business. So I
Mm.
think that the expectations have to match what the front office does during this coming off season. If the Knicks don't make any significant upgrades, if the Knicks, strike out, or if they're conservative and say like, we don't want to invest too much in terms of assets for a lateral player acquisition, then the expectations are pretty much the same, like playoffs. All right, get into the playoffs. Hopefully, RJ takes the step, and what would amount to his fifth season. Um, Maybe there's a deal on the table for an Evan Fournier to be moved somewhere because of his contract. But
Mm.
if they're able to swing a deal for, someone of note, someone of, stature in the league, and obviously I saw in the chat that someone said that Stephen A. Um, said Dame, well, okay. I mean, if we were talking 5 years ago, I'd be all for it. But even if it were a Dame, then the expectations do change. And again, I'm not advocating for Dame. I'm not advocating for Dame, but I do think that this is an off season where things are right for there to be crazy trades that we didn't think would have happened 365 days ago.
Yeah, man, in terms of my grade for the season, it's been a huge success. First and foremost, it's laying foundations for where we can get to, right? Second round, but took the Heat 6, banged up. So many factors we got to consider. Emmanuel quickly not playing, Quentin Grimes only playing 10 minutes in earlier, losing home court advantage. We were really set up to get to the Eastern Conference Finals, but it would have been a year kind of early. So next year for me is huge. And I think, as I made the point earlier, fam, is that there are 29 teams unsuccessful this year. So there's going to be a lot of movement. This off season is going to be buzzing. The Clippers are under the clock's ticking with them, with Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, Dame Lillard. Does he shake loose? The clock's ticking in Cleveland with Spider Mitchell, the Phoenix Suns, Devin Booker, all these teams that, Milwaukee had championship aspirations, are in the same position we are at. They didn't get further than we were. So with that said, I think there's going to be a plethora of deals, moves on the table, all you can eat, basically buffet of rumors, trades, stock, all of those things, and we have the assets. But the most important thing as to why I give this season an A is because we have put ourselves in a position now where we're extremely attractive. extremely attractive. I'm not talking about fake attractive from 2 years ago. I'm talking real attractive now, with Jalen Brunson balling out on national television, being the first Knick since Patrick Ewing, putting up 3 30-point games. There are other stars in the league admiring and watching this situation, whether you want a Carl Towns, whether you want someone else, Zach LaVine, Damian Lillard, whether or not this other guys I named earlier intrigued. But there's going to be possibilities, EJ, and I think the possibilities will be endless.
Yeah, I really do expect for the Eastern Conference to have it's there's going to be a massive shakeup.
Mm.
The Kevin Durant trade was really it was the linchpin for there to be more room for teams to shake up their rosters. If you guys remember, this past offseason, the Kevin Durant trade held up so much of the league business, and
Oh,
we talked about it at the start of September and October, and like how it was just impossible to trade him, and because of that, many teams went into the season with incomplete rosters. Guys, let's not forget, the Lakers the Lakers that are playing right now. That roster is not the roster that started the season, and in part it was because they were struggling to wield deals because everyone was waiting for the Kevin Durant trade. And so I do imagine that this offseason you'll see now that Kevin Durant is out of the East, um, I think trades will be happening at a more
yeah.
rapid pace as teams who a couple of seasons ago made deals with the expectations of being in playoff contention. They've gone 2 seasons, 3 seasons, and it hasn't warranted the idea of maintaining the status quo. So throw Chicago in there, throw Toronto in there, throw Charlotte in there. Particularly if you look at the ownership group question as to whether or not Michael Jordan will remain the head of
Mm.
basketball in Charlotte. Like it's conceivable that Charlotte will be a team. Atlanta, again, Atlanta's another intriguing situation. Even though Coach Quinn Snyder only had a chance to coach the team for a portion of the season, a small portion of the season, you can still imagine there being some questions as to what finally happens with John Collins, what happens with a DeJounte Murray, perhaps, what happens with the Trey Young. When newspaper headlines are talking about there being possible trades of the star player, something's happening.
Yeah, definitely. Basketball is back, I feel like, in New York City, and it's because of the Knicks. As we get ready to wrap this show up, right? Tie a ribbon, a bow. We'll play the victory music one more time because hey, this is steps in the right direction. We didn't pull it off. We didn't make the Eastern Conference Finals, but the season ends as a success. But question marks await. CT and EJ here with the streets buzzing this off season. To think, one of the best things about going into the season this late, EJ, is we're already in mid-May. The draft lottery is just weeks away, or a week away. Then we're 1 month away from the NBA draft and free agency. So you cannot blink when the streets are buzzing.
Nah, man. And all it takes is one trade request. I mean, we've already seen what's happened with Phoenix and talks about Chris Paul probably leaving Phoenix. Again, that has nothing to do with the Knicks, but it just shows how quickly things can come together and fall apart. So it's going to be some very interesting times.
Yep, definitely. We'll have an autopsy season next week. We'll have some guests on. We'll talk about our off-season primer and draft. See if the Dallas Mavericks can slip and give us our pick back. Listen to the wash-up, players praised, players criticized, coaching, analyzed. But one thing's for sure, man, we'll be here, we'll be covering it. Best chat in the biz, salute. Can't say enough about the support all year, man. The playoff buzz has been amazing. Having Cavs fans, Heat fans interact. No, from the bottom of my heart, appreciate it. EJ, also, all your efforts, contribution, man. It's been so good having you here, man.
CT, thank you so much. I joined the Knicks Buzz family last season, and many of you guys know the story through the great Mark Berman and CT and I. We tried it, and it just clicked. It just worked. two continents. We're two different continents, but the brotherhood is really strong here. So CT, thank you so much for being the captain of the ship.
Mm.
I appreciate all of your love and support behind the scenes. And just shout out to everybody who supports this channel. Listen, there's so many different channels who cover the Knicks, but you made the decision every single game, every single post game, preseason, previews, playoffs. You rock with us. And so we are entirely grateful to you. And just one other quick shout out to all of the amazing guests we had this season. So whether it was Bill Daughtry, and I got a chance to talk to the legend Bill Daughtry. We had a chance to talk to John Schmelk a few times. We had a chance to talk to Coach Nick. We had a chance to talk to the one and only David Aldridge, to our friend Mark Berman, who had recently retired. We had so many amazing, Bill Pito. We've had so many amazing conversations, and I know I'm missing a few, but thank you so much, everyone, and we're still going to be here rocking.
Facts, yeah. We ain't going nowhere. This journey just getting started, firing up the engine. But like EJ said, thank you to all the guests, super chats, normal chats, comment section, replay gangs, likes as well. You all help this thing buzz right now. Wear your Knick gear, your Knick cap with pride, because we back. Basketball is back in New York City and the streets are buzzing. We out.